and to then remove this heat out of the body. Now we're going to be looking at the lactic acid component and the slow component in a bit more detail in terms of the graph. In the lactic acid component we can represent the idea that it is a slower process than the alactic acid component. This is because in order to return the body's metabolic needs back to pre-exercise state, and so the ventilation rate, cardiac output and core body temperature can be maintained. Also, to remove the carbon dioxide and oxidize or remove the lactic acid, which takes longer than just replacing the ATP and PC stores. We can see that this is represented by the graph showing the recovery needed in order to repay the oxygen deficit, which is the result of the build-up of the waste products, particularly lactic acid. We can see that as soon as we stop exercising, the demands are decreased, and therefore we are not using as much oxygen in order to fuel the respiring tissues. So therefore our consumption increases more than the amount used, and this extra oxygen is then used in order to remove the waste products from the body, so we can return to a pre-exercise state. As we can see, there is an increase in the oxygen repaid as the recovery time increases, and we can observe that the graph starts to have a slower increase when it becomes around 85% saturated. Because the stores are not replenished in a short duration, we can see that the stores don't completely replenish until at least an hour after exercise. In high intensity exercise, it takes up to 60 seconds in order for the lactate to start to accumulate, and therefore the body requires oxygen in order to remove it from the body. This process helps to restore the glycogen in the muscles and the liver, and as we mentioned, this is a slow recovery, taking up to an hour. This is because the lactic acid also has to be removed, and this can take time, especially if it is being converted into more useful products. Around 15 to 20 times the resting value of lactic acid is produced during exercise, and they are removed in the following ways. 65% of the lactic acid is converted into pyruvate, and this can then help to enter the Krebs cycle and is a fuel in order to produce ATP, where it's converted to CO2 and H2O. 5% of the lactic acid is converted to glucose by the Cori cycle in the liver. 20% of the lactic acid is converted to glycogen, also in the Cori cycle, and stored in the muscles and liver as glycogen, stored from glucose. And lastly, 10% of lactic acid is converted into protein in the body, which can be used. It shows that lactic acid therefore does have positive benefits in the production of energy stores in order to help replenish these stores quicker in recovery. The alactic acid component is known as the restoration of muscle phosphagen due to the resynthesis of ATP into ATP and PC. This process is very rapid, as we can see on the graph on the left. It takes 120 seconds to be fully restored. It is achieved through three mechanisms. These are an aerobic conversion of carbohydrates into carbon dioxide and water to allow the ADP and the phosphate to be joined back together to form ATP. A proportion of this ATP is then used to create phosphocreatine by a coupled reaction, and then a small minority of this ATP is synthesized via the glycogen, resulting in a small volume of lactic acid being produced. During recovery, the levels in the body are higher, like temperature and hormones, and this therefore maintains high heart rate, respiratory rate, metabolic rate, and this means more oxygen is needed, which causes EPOC to increase. And for submaximal exercise, we can see that the recovery time would be over a much longer period of time because the lactate is accumulated over a prolonged period, so it's going to take much longer in order for these stores and the lactic acid to be removed. Save that in a marathon runner, because the strenuous exercise they're putting on their muscles means that the lactate is building up much more slowly, and therefore it's going to mean it's much slower in order to be released out of the body. The graph on the right shows the phosphagen recovery during interval training, and we can see that if there is a short interval between the bouts of training, the levels of phosphagen stores gradually reduce, and then the energy is reduced for the next bouts, which will affect the performance of the athlete, as they will not be able to generate the same force. This is mainly for sports that are intermittent, so like shot put. If you think about submaximal, like there's different bouts of exercise in, say, a triathlon. sometimes you're going to be working at higher intensity from the swim phase to the cycling phase. You may have to increase your intensity, and it's then the recovery that the athlete gives themselves in order to replenish the stores. And this will affect the performance, as they will not be able to generate the same force. This forces the muscles to adapt in order to store more ATP and PC so it can be conserved, and so their ability is improved to release oxygen sparingly, and this increases the alactate component. Anaerobic training, interval training, has showed that 30-second bouts increase the glycolytic enzymes to work from 10% to 25%, and this therefore increases the glycolytic capacity and the muscles to increase the tolerance to lactic acid and create a greater tension. This means they can prolong the OBLA and delay the effects of fatigue. Now we're going to talk about DOMS. DOMS is the delayed onset muscle soreness. This is the pain and stiffness felt in the muscles several hours to days after unaccustomed or strenuous exercise. It is a result of microscopic tears in the muscle, which result in them producing insufficient contractions because the injuries that have been sustained in the connective tissues. The mechanical forces and eccentric contractions mainly, and we can see that. Look at this from an example of in running, where the muscles are concentrically contracting and eccentrically contracting continuously, and this causes structural damage to the tissue, resulting in inflammation. And this inflammation is from the muscle proteins being broken down, which stimulate the pain receptors due to the decrease in pH in the blood. Ways that we try to recover from DOMS is by active recovery, and this allows the muscles to be nourished with oxygenated blood and reducing the effects of lactate in order to speed up recovery, so we can sort of reduce these effects of stiffness and soreness so we can continue to participate in exercise. And we're going to look at strategies next, which we can use to help to reduce these. But just to name a few, by building training gradually can also help this, and so that the effects after taking part in exercise aren't as severe. By cross-training, using different types of trainings in order to focus on different muscles and not working them too hard so we can preserve them. Cool down and light exercise, which we will come to in a minute. There are different strategies in order to aid recovery. One of these is an active cool down. This is at post-exercise, where the athlete undergoes a series of exercises at a lower intensity, which could consist of short bursts after they have participated in exercise. This helps their body to adapt and then reduce the risk of injuries to the muscle fibres. It helps them to recover physically and psychologically from the stresses of training and competing while still maintaining fitness levels, due to the fact that it encourages enhanced blood circulation around the body in order to make sure all the vital organs are being replenished with oxygen, particularly the muscles, in order to help remove the waste products of carbon dioxide and lactic acid which have accumulated, in order to reduce the lactate levels, and the hydrogen ions to be released in order to ease muscle pain and soreness, and to reduce DOMS. It is also important psychologically, and it has a positive effect in inducing relaxation in the performer to relieve the stress and tiredness. In important competitions, this is vital, because if the athlete then progresses to the final of an event, they're going to need to be performing at their best. So by performing an active recovery at the end of each period of exercise will reduce the risk of fatigue. This would involve light dynamic stretches or short bursts of activity to help to lower the cardiovascular responses to exercise down more slowly, and help to restore the ranges of movement to not result in muscle stiffness when the body's temperature remains elevated. It also helps to speed up the fast and slow components of EPOC to increase oxygen delivery, and prevents venous pooling and maintains venous return. Venous pooling is when the smooth muscles surrounding the veins become slack, and therefore the veins fill with the majority of the blood in the body, and the brain is then deprived of blood, which can cause unconsciousness and cause serious health effects on the performer, which impacts their performance in the sport. And we just have a graph to show that the blood lactate concentration and how after exercise this is replenished during recovery. So we can see that it doesn't deplete as much when there's no exercise, but during light exercise it decreases much more quickly, and it takes much longer in order to the lactate concentration in order to come back down to its resting value in light exercise. So like a marathon runner, a long distance runner, or anything that's where the athlete's working at steady state exercise. Another strategy is nutrition, and by having an effective diet before, during and after activity helps in order to delay fatigue and speed up recovery. So if we have more carbohydrates and proteins, we can then preserve these stores in the body and reduce their depletion so we can utilise them in our sports better. By refuelling the body, the carbohydrate-rich foods help to mainly replace glycogen stores. And for an athlete whose training is quite consistent and regular, this would be really important in order to helping them restore their stores so that they can produce the same energy in each bout so their performance doesn't deteriorate. Also, it's to do with vitamins and minerals by rehydrating with water, and this means that you're rehydrating yourself so you're maintaining the viscosity of the blood, and you're allowing the water which has been lost by sweat to be replaced, so you're not functioning dehydrated, so you will not experience effects like heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And also, nutrition is important for rebuilding the muscle tissues in recovery, so we can resist the concept of sustaining an injury. And it helps with the long-term adaptations as well, the muscles to sort of accustom to the situation, so they know sort of the strenuous activity they're going to be put under and how they can sort of reduce the risks of fatigue. And lastly, we have a warm-up, and this helps to speed up recovery because you are increasing the oxygen delivery in the muscles before the event in order to minimise the oxygen deficit. Because we have more oxygen in the system to start with, you are also increasing the temperature in the body to allow the muscles to warm up before commencing an exercise, so the risk of injury is reduced to aid recovery, so we don't prolong it. In aerobic exercise, the athlete uses VO2 max training in order to reduce their recovery ratio for the work relief ratio. This is normally longer in duration and intensity exercise, as it is just below the anaerobic threshold. The relief ratio is typically shorter and 1:1 as opposed to 3:1. This helps to reduce the OBLA and delayed muscle fatigue, so it therefore prolongs the aerobic system adaptations, and therefore this is why this system is more resistant to fatigue than that of the glycolysis system. And this is why it's more suitable for the long distance athletes, so they can prolong their performance, so they can delay the effects of fatigue and therefore reduce the risk of developing DOMS, because the hydrogen ions and lactate accumulate over time, and the oxygen is used to break these down, so it's sort of being combated while the athlete is exercising. And this is just my reference list from where I got all my information from. And that is the end of 2.3 assignment.